Hi, everybody, and welcome back to It Takes a Village. I'm excited to be joined by my friend, Brian Fahey. Brian is here with us today to talk about the many questions that we enjoy on It Takes a Village. Really, we talk about community life, resiliency, and how community life is helping us shape communities of belonging, deep, abiding belonging. We're here right now on the Tri-Faith Commons in Omaha, Nebraska, so we have a particular angle when we think about belonging. So Brian is here wearing many hats this morning, so welcome, Brian.
Thank you. I actually don't have a hat on at the moment.
He does not have a hat on, but he will. I'm about to place 4 hats on your head. So Brian Fahey serves on the Douglas County Board of Commissioners, where he focuses on public safety, health systems, community well-being, many other things that nobody really knows about, mostly. He's paid for all of those tiny details. He's also the chair of the Tri-Faith Initiative Board, helping lead one of the country's most innovative interfaith collaborations, an exciting time for Tri-Faith. Brian is also an attorney, and he is a partner at Gutman Law Partners, and has been practicing for many years here in the Omaha community. Probably the favorite part of your job as an attorney is that you get to wear a suit every day. Is that correct?
That is actually why I became an attorney.
I know, and you get to wear really cool, beautiful ties, like this very purple pre-Advent tie that you're wearing for us. In the Christian tradition, Advent starts in a week, so you are launching us 1 week early.
Thank you. That is why I wore it. I wanted to be liturgically appropriate.
Of course, and you're always so appropriate. So we are so thankful that you're here. He also wears a hat that many of us wear in this life. It's probably the most challenging and most privileged hat to wear, and that is that Brian is a father of 2 daughters. Proud father of 2 daughters. He lives in my neighborhood, so I know all of his secrets. I know where he lives. I know what his daughters have to say about his parenting behaviors.
Yes.
So we will talk about that, and I'll ask Miriam how we did. How's that?
That sounds like a plan, and Miriam will always let you know her opinion on any topic.
Yes, she will, and we love her for that. Brian, your family is members at Temple Israel here on
Yes.
the Commons. So tell me about this. You did not grow up Jewish. You are not Jewish.
Correct.
Okay, so tell me about this interfaith collaboration that you and Sarah are employing in your home.
Oh, sure. Well, so yes, that's correct. I'm Catholic, in fact, and but my wife and my daughters are Jewish. We belong at Temple Israel. And so one of the reasons that I actually thought that as a non-Jewish member of Temple that I thought would be a good use of my time and talent is to work on the Tri-Faith Initiative Board. That was why I signed up for it, because I've sort of have always had this, even though I've always been Catholic, I've sort of been on this interfaith journey. I'm a former UCC employee. I was the UCC choir director for a short time in my life. I was the church administrator, secretary for an Episcopal church, as you and I were discussing before the podcast. And then I graduate of a Lutheran college, an ELCA college, and then now I belong at Temple. And so my wife and I have known each other for 20 years. We met in high school, so more 25 years now that I do the math. And so we sort of have thought about how we wanted to raise our family and what it would look like. And this was sort of always the vision we had for it. And it's pretty fun for our girls because they get to do all the holidays and they enjoy that very much. And it's just been a fun way to sort of raise our family.
Yeah, awesome. And we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But I really want to start with what most of our listeners are probably curious about, including me, myself, and I. So if you don't know very much as a citizen of Douglas County about the Board of Commissioners, what is it that the Board of Commissioners spends their time doing? And what do you as a commissioner spend most of your time doing?
Sure. And that's the question I absolutely get most about being on the county
Right.
board. So I got elected to the county board about a year ago. I was sworn in January at the start of 2025. So I'm about 11 and a half months into my service. Yeah. So the county board is the board that oversees Douglas County government, which is the other part of our administration. We have the city of Omaha, which is its government is much larger. We have a city council. And so the county board, it oversees those unincorporated parts of Douglas County, which some people might not know do exist. And then it also runs a number of departments that aren't run by the city. So we have a Department of Corrections, we have a county jail, we have a county sheriff. Now the county sheriff has its own elected official who runs it, but we sort of manage the budget for all of these departments. We have a county attorney's office. We have a courthouse that we have to run. We have a Douglas County Health Center. We are soon to have a new freestanding community mental health center. So
right.
the county, we have, over 25 departments. We have over 2,600 employees. And again, we're much smaller than the city, but we have lots of our own departments that we have to oversee and manage.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, there are so many areas that we could cover today. You kind of you have a front row seat to many of the challenges, right, that we have faced in our own community. What gives you hope, kind of right now as you're thinking not just about the meetings you're attending, but where you see people collaborating across this community?
Sure. I think that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of times, I mean, we have a lot of despair in our national politics.
Right.
But our local politics really remain very much the same. And one of the reasons that I wanted to run for the county board, or that I was drawn to it, was, it's a partisan board in the sense of that you get elected as either a Democrat or Republican. You get a little letter next to your name on the ballot when people are voting for you, which is actually different than the legislature or the city council or the mayor's office, which are all nonpartisan. Yet the county board in so many ways is, we just don't have a lot of issues that easily fit into these Democrat and Republican boxes. In fact, we have virtually none. I mean, we're really on this sort of ground level, nitty gritty work. And so there's, some of us are Democrats, some of us are Republicans, but it very rarely manifests that we have disagreements along partisan lines. And so that was what I was hoping it would be. That has turned out to be true. I can honestly say I enjoy working with everyone else on the board equally, regardless of their political party. And so what gives me hope is really that. And it's that for everything going on, and I think for the unfortunate political reality that in some ways our national politics have consumed our local politics.
Right.
But the local politics remain. And even though people aren't as, I don't know that I want to say they're not as interested. I think that's unfair. I think people are as interested as they ever were or weren't, but they just have less, I do believe they have less time and less bandwidth to worry about it, or to be concerned, or to pay attention to it. And during the campaign, we knocked on a lot of doors. We knocked on thousands of doors.
Right.
And more than I think other races, similar races may have, we really emphasized that portion of the campaign. And so I spent, the thing I did most in 2024 was knock on people's doors and ask them to vote for me. And that was a real window into that, for everything going on, people's problems, people's concerns, not to get, I suppose, too poetic, but their hopes, their dreams, their fears really remain pretty constant from what they were 15 or 20 or 100 years ago.
Oh, that's very interesting. I was going to ask you, what in your work, and maybe from that campaign trail all the way to today, like what do you wish that people understood more about the work that you're doing, or about the board? And one thing, obviously, the partisan, nonpartisan issue that you just discussed, right? I think not everybody realizes that. But what do you hope people understand about your work, and about that people are still the same and facing the same issues?
That's a great question. I think, what I wish people understood, I think there's a couple things.
Yeah.
What I wish people mostly understood, more than anything, if there was one thing about my job that I think that they either don't understand or don't want to believe, is that if there was an easy solution to something, it would have been solved by now. So even though I sit at this very, very, relatively low level of government, by the time a county problem gets to us, it's already passed through enough hands that it's like, well, there's not a clear answer. And any option that you choose is going to have benefits and drawbacks, and you just have to weigh those. There's no slam dunks. But when you're dealing with a level of government, and maybe this applies to every level of government, and we as the voter, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, but when we only have a little bit of time to process an issue or look at an issue, we really want to believe that there's a good solution and there's a bad solution, and we want to reduce it to those options. And it's so easy to sit there and think, why don't you just do A, And so with the county, that's usually comes down to just budget, which is why don't you just, if the problem is, do we spend money on this thing or not? The voter's going to say, depending on their own personal beliefs on what we should be spending money on, I want you to do this thing. Why don't you, the answer is easy, just do it. And the drawback is we don't have the money. And the county, unlike the city, can't create its own taxes. The county we are almost, with some exceptions we can talk about, but the county is almost entirely beholden to property taxes. And if valuations in the county go up a lot, we have more money. And if they go down, we have less. And we can raise our mill levy. But at the end of the day, we have to balance our budget. And so, we're just constantly prioritizing. And everything we are prioritizing, or more than others, everything is worthy on some level. And then we might disagree about what's more worthy than others, but we all agree that everything here is worthier to get more money than we have to give it. And so that's what I wish people probably understood more.
Right. I
think when it comes to the second part of your question, with understanding whatever about people's hopes and dreams and what they want or don't want, and this is going to sound cliche, but it's really true. It's that really, regardless of your political beliefs and your political affiliation, people's tendencies on a macro level, their wants and their hopes and their desires and their fears are pretty uniform. No matter how far left or far right you are, we generally want security and prosperity, and we want the world we're in to be better than we left it, and we fear those things we don't know or don't understand. And everything else is just, every other difference, I think, is accounted for by external filters and media and experience. But at the end of the day, that's all pretty uniform.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I think that we perpetuate different narratives upon different groups of people based on the history of somebody else putting them in a particular box, right? So you're talking about this, universal hopes and dreams, universal chaos and suffering. I mean, in my line of work, that's very similar, right? Depending on where you are on the religious spectrum, right? You're on the Tri-Faith Commons, we all share the same hopes and dreams, and we are all very connected by the human condition. So
yes.
Wherever you sit on that aisle. So on the flip side, listening to you talk, it's, everybody on the board would love to be able to have these allocations to say, yes, this is worthy, yes, this is worthy, yes, this is worthy, we're going to fix these issues. How would you respond to everyday residents? If we could do something tomorrow that would make county government work better for everyone, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. If I had to say one thing that would make the county government work better, and I don't know if this is, I think what would make the county government work better in the short term would be just people having more involvement in what we do day to day. Because, and Laura knows, I knew this getting into it. But again, we get back to that bandwidth of people just don't have the time to pay attention to it. And that's mostly true. And I would hope so, because I just said it a few minutes ago. But
it's so true. The last time you said it and this time. It's so
it
true.
Remains true.
People do not have time.
But if I could quibble with the thing I said and asserted, one of our problems is we have so many more ways to draw at our attention, and we don't have the time or the inclination to just read. We don't read the newspaper like we used to, and that's unfortunate, because we tend to read news that's more filtered to what we want to read about. And for most people, it's much more exciting or sexier to read about national politics, or to read about the, constant reality TV show that has consumed Washington, D.C. By design, which is by design. But, so what you used to have was the only source of, I think, reading stimulation you might have in the morning with your breakfast was the newspaper, and just by nature, you would get information about what was going on at the county level. So at some level, even though people maybe never paid a great deal of attention, they paid more because they would just see something going on.
Right.
And it would pique their interest or pique their outrage. And it just, for good or bad, that doesn't happen anymore. And there's ways that the lack of scrutiny can make your job easier, because you get to, you could spin it to say, well, we just get to roll up our sleeves in relative obscurity and do the work. And we do try to do that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, citizen involvement and citizen interest would really benefit the county.
Well, that's a great account of the history and the evolution of how we receive information, and then the rituals that we pass on, right? It used to be your great grandfather read the paper, then you did, and now there will be a different kind of a legacy of receiving information. I want to ask you about leadership, because you've just talked about the scrutiny sometimes devolves into, okay, the lowest common denominator here is that the leadership then is going to respond to my, reading of the paper and the information and my outrage at it. Well, as a leader in observing these kinds of tendencies and then your own work in the middle of it, how have you grown as a leader, or how have you maybe observed a leadership at the county board, maybe even an attorney? How have you changed in the way that you might lead or respond based on those changing demographics around receiving information?
So I think the way that I've changed, at least in the last year, is I'm much less certainly judgmental of people that come to me. I think there's sort of this, one thing I've noticed on my iPhone is when I get these little ads to download some stupid pay-for-play game app, is those ads, the commercials, and I swear this is a phenomenon. I have not looked into it, but it's got to be, is the commercial always shows the person playing it poorly. And I think we have like a natural urge to be like, well, I could do it better than that. And I think that's a little bit, I think that's how most of us somewhat naively come to this service, is it always just seems like, such a dumpster fire. And so you're like, well, I'll do that better. And yeah, and on a rational level, that, no, this is actually, it's harder than it looks. As is anything worth doing in life is harder than it looks. And so I'm certainly less judgmental of other people making those, or other leaders making those stumbles, or when people come to me because something has gone wrong for them, like a person who, like one of the administrators or heads of a department who reports to the county board, because pretty much every week somebody's coming to us and saying this thing went wrong, and maybe it's a little thing that nobody's really going to care about, but we have to deal with, or maybe it's a big thing that has been or is going to shortly be in the newspaper. And I'm much less quick to judge on those things, and I'm much more inclined to just sit and listen and think through it. And I think that, I suppose that's the most surprising part of my time this year on the board, on the county board or on the Tri-Faith board, has been that the just my brain has reflexively gone in difficult moments, or where you're like, what would so-and-so do? The so-and-so, the person I'm thinking, what would they do, I tend to just, my brain goes to the quieter role models I've had, or the leaders who have been more contemplative or more reflective, as opposed to other leaders that I have certainly tried to emulate or looked up to, who were more bombastic or more oratorical. Is oratorical a word?
Yeah, it's a word.
Yeah.
You said it's a word, so it's a word. It's a word, Brian Fahey.
We know what I meant on some level,
exactly.
So it's going to become a word. But I think, I think that has surprised me, but that has also informed me. And maybe as I get more comfortable, and maybe as I'm not seeing everything that I see is for the first time, which is a nice way of saying maybe when I don't feel like such a moron all the time.
Then maybe.
I don't know if that day will ever come, but then I'll be more vocal. But I at this point, I think I'm much more inclined to just sit and think about things and be thoughtful than I think I have been in my younger days.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of describing this sort of patient, observant, and compassionate kind of leadership, while also depicting yourself as a father who would play Candyland with his children and still say, "I beat you, haha," right? The motivation of that game.
I have never beaten my children at Candyland.
Of course
you
haven't.
Not a single time.
That's why you're still playing that game on your phone every time it pops up. So Brian, you've talked about leadership. You've reflected on your role on the board as an attorney. How do you have the balance between the work that you do as a civic, dedicating your time, right, to the community, and then also wearing the hat of someone who has X's and O's to deal with and finite kinds of works and allocations and resourcing versus your role on the board? How do those interplay?
In terms of sort of balancing my hats, I think I'm just pretty bad at it. I think I've always been a notoriously terrible time manager.
Nice.
And I think
Sarah agrees.
Yes.
Sarah Cowan, if you're out there, I have your back.
That's my wife, just for reference. And she would agree. But one thing that gives me strength in that is it turns out that the people most likely to do this thing where they take on two careers or they overextend themselves actually are more likely to be bad time managers. Then the good ones seem to better know their limits and stick to them. So when I'm running around with my hair on fire and trying to do too much and trying to respond to too many emails, it turns out the people I can commiserate with the other people in the situation because they tend to be more like me.
Right.
And so I don't think that answered your question at all.
It was great. You just told us how ineffective you are at your 2 jobs where you're paid. So I want to ask you about the job that you're not paid for, right? Your role as chair of the Tri-Faith Initiative Board, right? So talking about leadership and the work that you do, it's so important. And you've been such a committed servant leader, right, in this community. And maybe your children would disagree, but I will say it's wonderful to highlight the work that you're doing and to find out, kind of what motivates you to continue, even with your bad time management, to say yes to these kinds of roles, particularly the Tri-Faith Initiative, serving. You talked about what led you first to be a part of the Tri-Faith, but then saying yes to chairing the board at such a time as this.
Sure. And so I think, well, first off, I'm assuming most of your podcast audience already knows this, but to be clear, so we exist, Countryside, Temple Israel, and the American Muslim Institute on the Tri-Faith campus. And within the campus, there is a 4th building that houses the Tri-Faith Initiative, which is its own separate 501c3 entity. And it's separate, but it also has shared governance with members from each of our faith partners sitting on that as well. But the initiative has its own board of directors that is apart from the governing bodies of each of the 3 faith partners.
Right.
And so that's the board that I chair, and that's the initiative. And so when the Tri-Faith campus was built, there was sort of this momentum and this push to say that what had happened here was so special and so unique that it merited having not only the 3 faith partners, but its own separate organization to, I think, both nurture the spirit of the campus and also sort of spread the word and do the work in the community and the world. So if the question I'm supposed to be answering is why did I say I would do it, I don't think I'm going to be able to answer that question because I still don't know, other than it seemed just like there was a need. We've been through a lot of transition at the initiative. And I do, so to be clear, part of what I do as an attorney is nonprofit advising, and my firm helps with general nonprofit entity formation and compliance and all of that great stuff. And that's work I do find very rewarding professionally. And so I've brought a lot of that experience, I'm hopeful, to chairing the board of directors. But it's certainly been a lot of building the plane as we fly it. And, we just hired a new executive director who was on this podcast very recently, Renee Franklin. And she's off to a roaring start, and we're very glad for that. And so it's been incredibly rewarding work, and it's been a really good way to fulfill, in my mind, for myself, I think personally fulfill what I felt was sort of the place we were supposed to be, which was this campus. And I'll tell a quick story.
Yeah.
But when my daughter Miriam was born in 2016, and she was a little baby, we'd go to Tot Shabbat or Temple Tots, which are some of the programs we have at Temple Israel for little kids. And we were able to look out, and during that time and over those years, right before COVID, watch Countryside be built and AMI be built and the initiatives, Tri-Faith Center be built. And then COVID happened and everything stopped. And then we didn't set foot in Temple for a couple of years. And so then it felt like oh yeah, we had all this promise of what was going to be, not just from the physical real estate that was built, but from the interaction, the community we were going to have. And in some ways that was hindered by all that went on. And so now trying to help sort of fulfill that has been really meaningful.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sharing sort of those historical steps and who we are and why we exist. So many people are still asking, why does the Tri-Faith exist? How has the Tri-Faith weathered these storms, right, from the war? How are you still on the campus building relationships? There's so many questions, this deep curiosity, which I think is the human concern is, how do we continue relationship when there's conflict? How do we continue relationship when the world doesn't even know how to answer the questions of, how do I see my neighbor at the mailbox who might be a little different and say hi and feel like that's okay?
Right.
Yeah, so we're faced with these kind of questions all the time. And I think the beauty of being on the Tri-Faith Commons is that we don't have to answer those questions with an elevator speech, we have the opportunity and the privilege to answer those questions by walking the bridge.
Absolutely.
And, going to Friday prayers at the mosque and going to Shabbat, community church. So that's a real unique experience that we are afforded here on this Commons. I will ask you, as just a family, going and participating over time, how do your kids or how have your children experienced the tri-faith experience, not only observing, from afar, seeing through the glass? Do they, children always lead the way, but what kind of questions have they asked, or what kind of experiences have they been exposed to, maybe that have altered the way they see the world, or others who are different, maybe not only religiously, but in other terms?
That's a great question. And I think too, some of it sort of ties into what I was just saying about this. We built this campus, and then we were all wondering, well, what's it going to be like? And so I think I started chairing this board in January of 24. And then in, I think February, Miriam, who was 8 at the time, had the opportunity as part of her Sunday education her Sunday school religious education, to go and visit Countryside and to go and visit AMI. But part of me thought, one, that's wonderful and it's moving and it's what I was hoping she'd have, because she came back with lots of questions and thoughts and just thought it was a great experience. But also that took 8 years.
Right.
And she'd been to before COVID, not that she was old enough to remember, we used to have a large tri-faith picnic, which, we have thankfully restarted since the COVID shutdown. But, essentially taking 2 years where she wasn't at Temple. So, between like 4 and 6, she just didn't set foot in the building because of COVID. She did do her Sunday school by Zoom when she was a kindergartner. But, in some ways, I think it's notable that it has provided her so many more opportunities to experience kids from other religions and other cultures on a deeper level. But it's also somewhat reflective of her life today. I mean, she attends an OPS elementary school that has students from all around the world that speak a variety of languages. And that's going to be her experience through middle school and through high school when she goes to Central. And so it's actually going to stop. And, depending on where she goes for higher education, if she goes for higher education, it'll probably stop when she gets a job and settles into a profession and buys a house, because the odds, just based in America, it's much more likely that once she becomes an adult, her life's going to become a lot more monochromatic and monocultural. And it'll always be well, let me back up. If she stays in Omaha and if she's part of Temple and Tri-Faith, as if she's in Omaha, I would hope she does, that'll actually turn into one of the more unique sources of multicultural exposure she'll have.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as a parent, I think those questions are always ever before us, right? How do our children help shape the way that we engage differently? And then how do we foster from, the side, the front, bottom, all the ways this continued nurture of their inquisitive thought about difference, without enculturating them with our own unconscious bias about how they should respond or the questions they should have. I think you've just named what many of us share on the Commons, is this real joy that by default, not by default, intentional, right, default, but being here now, the opportunity to engage across the Omaha community with just about anyone who has similar questions of, well, how do we move forward across the status quo difference that we've been promulgated to perpetuate? So there are opportunities all the time, whether it's talking about the city's the formation of immigrants who built this city and these communities, and on whose shoulders we rest and have the opportunity to further that work. On the Tri-Faith Commons, we have a real opportunity to continue asking questions and living the story. I mean, that's really it. We are living the story. We don't have all the answers. Brian Fahey has most of the answers, folks, but he doesn't have all the answers. Not. So we're thankful. We're so thankful to be here. I'm thankful for your leadership and your friendship. It's a joy to have you here on the Commons at Tri-Faith and here at Countryside and in my neighborhood. Your dad is my neighbor. You're my neighbor. This is Omaha, folks. We are living this village. It takes a village to raise kids. It takes a village to build a better community. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for not beating your children in Candyland. Give them a little bit of a break, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. This is such a pleasure.
Thank you. We'll see you next time. Have a good one on It Takes a Village. Remember that this is a place for you. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you belong. Reach out if we can connect with you. We'll see you next time.